Hi, folks. I'm Dan Dworkis, and this is the Emergency Mind Podcast, a space where we bring together lessons from the emergency department and beyond about performing at our best when it matters the most and applying knowledge under pressure. Our guest this episode is Marius Aleksa. Now, Marius is a performance advisor with Performance Advisory Group, where he helps elite performers find and leverage their competitive advantage. He's previously worked with the Miami Marlins and with Special Operations Soldiers. And more than that, he's somebody who, over the last, I don't know, what has it been, like 2 years or something?
2 years.
Yeah, that I've just genuinely enjoyed having a wide-ranging, sometimes rambling, sometimes focused series of conversations about what human performance is and what it means to help somebody else really reach their full potential. So, Marius, welcome to the podcast, man. I'm happy to have you.
Thank you. And I'm glad that we can do this because I've always enjoyed our conversations, even when they go into some ramblings.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome ramblings. That's what I should have said. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, for folks that don't know you, can you give a bit of a background arc of how you got to be where you are, and what's that arc look like? How did you get interested in human performance to begin with?
I would say it started with being a collegiate athlete. Being a college swimmer at University of Chicago, I was interested in how do I get the most out of myself and my performance. And actually, I don't feel like I did the best job. And I think that planted a seed for me to pursue performance and the rest of the things that I did. I studied psychology partly because I was interested in my own psychology and wanted to help my swimming career. But after that, I took a winding path. So I did Teach for America for 2 years. I was teaching seventh grade science while also club coaching swimming on the side. Did the 2 years, got a master's in education, and decided that I wanted to pursue coaching full time. I wanted to dive into pun not intended, into the performance realm full time and try to help collegiate swimmers be the best that they could be. And so I volunteered for a year at Ohio State University, did 4 years at University of Utah. But through that time, I started to notice that I was more interested in the general performance aspect of swimming than swimming itself. So that led me down a path to getting another master's in performance psychology,
Mm.
and eventually decided to pursue that full time. And so that led me to the military, where I was down at Fort Polk, Louisiana, doing resiliency training with soldiers. Eventually that led me to working with special operations soldiers, helping instructors and students become Green Berets. And that led to a time with the Miami Marlins as their mental skills coach, before now widening out my path again to work with all elite performers, whether that's business, medical, military, or athletics.
Mm. So cool, man. And okay, so let's go back to the beginning for a second. So you were a collegiate swimmer, and as you were doing that, was the mental aspects of performance, was performance. So actually, maybe we need to drive a wedge at the beginning here between the difference of mental performance and human performance. And I don't want to structure that, or I don't want to nudge you in any direction, but when you're using those terms, do you see them as the same thing? Are they different things? Do they, 'cause some of the folks we've talked to in the past have a wide difference in how they define those objects or those models.
Yeah. I think they're very intertwined, which is
Mhm.
why it can be easy to sometimes blend the two or mesh the two. I think that there are differences. I think that mental performance impacts human performance quite a bit, but it is not everything. And
Sure.
I've been around some brilliant strength and conditioning coaches, and I see the difference of high level of instruction and training when it comes to physiology and strength and conditioning and how that impacts human performance.
Yeah.
I think mental performance has a part to play in those things as well, but without that high level of training, when it comes to the physical side, then even if you might be the most mental resilient person ever, you're going to be capped at some point because of your
Sure.
physical capabilities. And that's why I think it's beautifully intertwined. I think that's why I've always enjoyed working with high collaboration teams, high performance teams, because oftentimes it's really hard to say where one starts and one stops. And so it's through working together with these different realms that you get the highest levels of human performance.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but in a lot of teams, those are separated, maybe even siloed, where you have some people working on the physical aspect of the thing you're doing and some people working on the mental aspect of the thing you're doing. And then the point of integration is left up to the player or the operator or whatever you want to say. Am I reading that right?
Yes, a lot of times it can be that way. I think I've naturally just gravitated towards having conversations with those different silos. And
Sure.
I feel like maybe I've experienced less of that siloing because of the way that I operate and because my beliefs that it's not just one thing. It's not going to come down to just one thing.
Sure.
I believe that the areas that I've been responsible for are incredibly important, but I don't think that it's everything. And so I take it upon myself to have these conversations. And so I don't think you're wrong. I think it's interesting to hear you say that because it makes me reflect on the fact that I've probably experienced a little less of that siloing than maybe it actually is.
Great. Yeah. No, I think it makes sense just from a fundamental level that to perform at a high level with whatever you're doing requires a mix of obviously like technical capacity and skill to do a thing, some sort of baseline level of performance ability, whether that we're talking about, I just came from a jujitsu class this morning, right? So I'm thinking about, okay, what are the, like, you need some sort of, you need strength, you need endurance, you need like flexibility, right? You need like a kinesthetic sense of yourself. And then you also need the mental side of understanding how to keep yourself calm under pressure and to do a lot of that work. And oh, it's great to hear that there are teams where you're proactively integrating those streams of thought and streams of technique together so that when you give it to or when you use that to support the operator or the athlete or whatever, it's not entirely on them to integrate it. And you can
Yes.
imagine two teams, right? One where here's your buffet, or here's the ingredients to cook a meal, but you have to cook the meal yourself versus here, we're going to show you how to cook a meal. Now here's a meal. Now go eat this meal. And there's just like different ways to put that together.
Yeah, I love that analogy because it makes me think that whether it's through working with the military or athletics, I often find it's like, hey, let me see you cook your meal.
Mhm. Yeah.
Let me see how you cook your meal right now. And then based off of what I see,
Mm.
it's reflective questions, it's curiosity. Why did you do it that way? Have you ever considered maybe doing it this way? Like maybe,
Yeah.
and then you might get an answer because they say, "Hey, I tried cooking it that way. It was nasty." Right?
Sure.
You're like, "Oh, okay. So we're definitely not going to go down that path, right?"
Yeah.
Or maybe if you would have done steps one, two, and three in this different order, it would have turned out differently. But I, that's why I really like that analogy because I find that through my experiences, what I've been able to do, it's often seeing them cook that meal
Mhm.
and then being able to provide suggestions, provide support in that way that I don't think I would be able to do if I didn't have that experience. I wasn't able to observe them in that natural setting, doing it to the best of their
Mm.
ability at that time.
I think you can tell when we do podcasts if I'm hungry or not based on if I use food metaphors. So we'll see if we'll track that over time and see what happens. But okay, so when you were starting out in this and you started getting interested in performance, your own performance, the people that were around you when you were swimming at the beginning, how would they fit into this metaphor? Would you categorize them as people who were leaving the integration to you? Were they helping you cook that meal? What did that look like? Like when you first started saying, hey, I think my swimming could get better if I did XYZ.
Are you talking about teammates or coaches and support staff, things like that?
I'm going to say yes to that.
Okay. I think that when I was a swimmer, I that's a great question. I think I took it like my coaches are going to outline the steps and I just have to execute these steps as best as I can. It's going to work out. And if it doesn't work out, then it's something on me and my execution. I also fully recognize that being a Division III swimmer, our coaches were overloaded with the amount of athletes that they had to coach. And so
Sure.
I didn't have the same specialization in training that I then was able to do as a Division I coach at Ohio State and at University of Utah. And so oftentimes I was training much more like a mid-distance swimmer when I was a sprinter, and probably would have benefited from
Mm.
more specific, sprint-specific training. But I think that's interesting because I had that ownership over my performance. I had that I felt responsible for how I performed, how I executed
Mhm.
that training. Looking back, I think I would have been very receptive and I could have benefited from more specificity. Yeah, I don't. It's that's a very interesting question.
I'll tell you why I asked that, which is that I think that we've seen from multiple folks on the podcast, then just in general with work through the emergency mind, that there's a common thread or common arc of somebody who's performing well, who gets curious about how they could personally perform better. And the first set of questions are usually some sort of technical thing. I want to get faster at X. I want to lift more of this. I want to shoot better. I want to last longer in the fire. I want to, for me, it was intubating somebody, like putting a breathing tube in, where I was like, why can't I be better at that thing? And it starts with this small nidus question of, I want to get better at this technical skill. And then it rolls out from there in terms of how could I get better in general? And then where do I look for performance work around this? And then eventually you get to this concept of, from a more ecological model, like, how do I set the stage for something to grow in the right direction? Right? Like, how do I set the soil and water it and provide the nutrients so that the thing grows by itself in the right direction? And if you approach it from the other angle, where you take some of the really elite teams, Olympic level sport, or really high functioning business, or a lot of the teams that we've both worked with, those people are obsessed about systems. What are the systems that are in place that make the individual operator, the individual agent, whatever, most likely to succeed in this environment? But that's a very different path than the human being like, I want to get better at playing chess or whatever it is. And I'm struck by that. I don't know what to do with that sentence, because you have the individual people that are like finding their way through the world. And then you have the elite systems that are more focused on systematic support. Somehow they sometimes meet in the middle, which is, when I reflect on the story you're telling me about your arc, that's what I'm hearing. You were interested, you got into it, you studied more things, and now you look at how to help people bridge that gap by themselves. And your theory and your philosophy, both in what you said here and in what you and I have talked about before, is some sort of mesoscale version of that. I don't even know if I have a question on that, just that I've been seeing that arc play itself out before.
If we go back to Marius, a collegiate swimmer, and I've seen this in more specifically in some of the athletes I've worked with in my baseball. I think of it sometimes as a maturation of your performance, a maturity that has to happen in your performance development. And I think that's what you're talking about, where when I was that athlete as a 18-year-old kid, I just wanted to be faster.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be faster. So I'm just going to train hard and do all the things that asked from me. And then, I'm going to walk away from practice and that's it. But then as I went through my career, the way that I look back at my 4-year collegiate career is slowly stripping away fears, excuses, obstacles to when I was a senior in college and realizing this is it for my athletic career. There's no postgraduate options for me as a collegiate swimmer. I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't good enough to do that. But it stripped everything away
Mm.
to saying, what are all the things that you can do to maximize your chances of success? And these examples now might sound silly at this point in time, but as a college kid that had 5:30 practice, I'm like, hey, I need 8 hours of sleep. What do I need to do in order to make that happen? And it
Mm.
was Sunday night, go to bed at 9:30. Or Wednesday night as a college kid, go to bed at 9:30 and get those 8 hours.
Yeah.
And I remember I started taking my hydration super seriously. I had a 32-ounce Gatorade squeeze water bottle, and I just carried it with me. And what struck me was I could have been doing this my whole 4 years, but I almost needed the staring in the face of, hey, this is going to end. And you want to be able to walk away saying that you did everything possible to make it happen. And so that was my maturity in
Interesting.
that performance development. But I saw it in professional baseball too, where whether it's holding back, whether it's just not knowing what that could look like, really have opened up my eyes to the systems, to the environment, to the process that we are creating. I think that's why I
Mhm.
stress increasing your probability of success, knowing that nothing is guaranteed, but knowing that there's a lot of things that you can do that are within your control to put yourself in a better position.
And I love that thought, that realization that I could have been doing this before. Why wasn't I? Right? What was it that was doing that? And I think there's a sense that happens in a bunch of these different fields where you're like, this has worked so far and it cost me so much energy to get to this point that I'm not going to do anything else. Or maybe I haven't seen from the people around me anything else other than this. This is what I'm going to do. Versus that concept of, and really maybe we're talking about explore versus exploit strategies here, where you're either going to continue doing the same thing you've been doing before, or you're going to take the energy to go try something else and see what that feels like. And, that willingness to do what is a very hard thing as a college student, which is to go to bed at 9:30. Like that's not easy, right? Like now it's great. Yeah, no problem. Go to bed
Yeah.
at 9:30, right?
Now I'm looking forward to it. Not something that I have to force myself to do.
Yeah, 7 a.m. jujitsu this morning, no problem. Let's go.
Yeah.
But it's different. But the willingness to try a thing and to really lean into it and to do those first couple steps and then to make that whole judgment arc of all right, I'm gonna experiment, I'm gonna try this. Here's what the outcome's gonna look like. Did it work? All right, now I'm gonna go back and try this next thing. That's a skill that you have to be taught at some point. And I guess I'm poking a lot at the early part of your career because as we then transition to all the other really cool things that you've done, I'd imagine you brought your experience arc on that. But along the way, you armed yourself with a lot of other models from education, from performance psychology. How did that interface look for you as you're looking back on your own experience and now you're blending together the tools of all these other disciplines? Were there moments along the way where it seemed to fit? Were there things that didn't mesh?
That is a great question because it makes me think of the fact that in all the domains that I've walked into, for example, working with special operations soldiers, I don't have any military background. I, when I first started working with the military, I had zero concept of what they went through and, what they do and all these things. Same thing with professional baseball. I walked into a major league clubhouse with my baseball experience being a little league baseball player that stopped playing after like eighth grade, and I was not good. And yet I was able to walk into these environments and I was able to do effective work. And I sometimes surprised myself in being able to integrate in these environments where I'm like, I don't belong here. These are
Sure.
elite. These are the best of the best, top 1% of performers that we're talking about. And if we go back to my experience as a collegiate swimmer, I think there was enough there that just made me really curious about getting better. The one thing that I didn't want to do is bleed my own experience onto a special operations soldier or a major league baseball player because I'm like, I
Mhm.
don't know what your experience is like.
Right.
I can't tell you what it's like to be in a batter's box facing 96-mile-per-hour fastballs, if not faster. But I can ask you questions about this while being armed with high performance principles and recognize some themes and patterns that might be universal or certain principles or concepts that might be a little bit more universal. And then based off of your answers and your experience, we can see how that fits into you and helping you. I think that early part of my journey sparked enough curiosity that I then carried through to those experiences and somehow made it relatable to this D3 college swimmer could somehow find relatability or find common ground to speak to a special operations soldier or speak to a major league baseball player and find that common ground that then says, okay, this is what the work is going to look like. This is where we go from here.
Yeah, curiosity is like not necessarily a word we hear a lot in the human performance space, right? There's a lot of broadcasting of do this, like sleep this much, drink this much water, all of which is good and important. But that sense of curiosity, both in terms of, like you described it before, like how did you learn to perform in this way? What were the reasons that you decided to do it this way? And what are the things that you're considering doing differently? And hey, here's a goal, get this much sleep or whatever. Why do you think you haven't been doing that so far? I love the way you're asking those questions and using that curiosity as a both an aligning tool with this other person who has a different lived experience and then also a wedge into actual sort of behavioral change, right? Because you're almost getting all the way back to like motivational interviewing and that kind of technique in order to get people to recognize where they could get better.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's elements of motivational interviewing, but I probably started doing it way before I knew what motivational interviewing was. But a lot of that is going back to when I step into working with Green Berets, I'm like, who am I to tell you what
Sure.
to do? Who am I to prescribe you stuff? Oh, and that's why I lean on asking questions because those guys have very good reasons for why they're doing what they're doing. Now, they will probably be the first ones to tell you that there's better ways to do things and they're constantly looking for those better ways. But I've always found that by examining where you are and why you're doing things the way that you're doing, then we can pull the strengths from that and see what is working well with it. What can we lean on? What can we maybe utilize with what you're doing well to continue getting better? But to me, I I almost cringe at the
Hmm.
idea of coming in and saying, you need to do this and this. And maybe that's just coming from that mental background as
Sure.
opposed to a more physical background where it's, yes, we know that you should drink this much water. You should attack the exercises in this way. But for me, it's being interested in, Dan, how do you think about this? What's going through your head of attacking it in this way? What's the perspective that you see? And let me share maybe some of my perspective of what I'm seeing and can you help me address this gap? And why are you thinking of it this way? And I think of this way, like, where's the common ground there?
Yeah.
And through those discussions and conversations, it creates this very organic way of, oh, these are things that we can improve. I find that it works well because they're not my ideas. We're coming up
Sure.
with ideas together to attack, and there's an inherent ownership that's baked into the process.
I'm struck by there's another guest in the podcast a while back, Kevin Sear from the SWAT universe, and he when one of his juniors would present a plan to him, like, hey, we're going to take this house or we're going to do this thing or whatever, he would ask the question, okay, tell me what you thought of but didn't choose and why. And that sort of same sort of mirrored logic to what you're describing, which is like, all right, so you've decided to get ready for your performance moment in this way. Can you help me understand what did you think about and not do? Some version of like, why do you do that? Why tie my shoes this way? Because when I was in kindergarten, blah, 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 blah. Right? You're like, okay, cool. Are there other ways to do it? Are there other things to throw in there? Where are you getting stuck? And man, I love that. I love that vector into these things.
I love that question because of the respect that it shows your junior.
Sure.
So and this is me speculating, but as a senior leader, here's an idea. He might recognize gaps, but he's showing respect by saying, like, I'm sure you thought through this plan. So talk through some of these gaps that I'm seeing because I'm sure you've given it consideration. And I think it's very respectful. It's showing generosity to that junior. And maybe they didn't think that through, but it almost creates this psychological safety to then identify some of these gaps where it's like, hey, I'm not attacking you. I'm not shooting down your idea.
Sure.
We have two people in this room. We have different perspectives. We have different experiences. We're recognizing some gaps. But before I say, hey, that's a gap, why didn't you think of that? It's talk me through your process. Talk me through the options that you didn't take. I feel it creates just a healthier, more productive conversation where you're avoiding that junior getting defensive and you're laying out those options. And I feel like that just plants the seeds of a lot more learning and growth than anything else.
And that respect and curiosity is such a good way to get into performance. And I think about even this morning in jiu-jitsu class, I was rolling with the instructor and he was going from a butterfly half guard and I pinned his foot to the ground. And he paused for a second. He goes, "Tell me, explain to me why you did that. What was your thought process?" And I looked down and was genuinely surprised that my hand was down there. I had no idea. I was like so lost. like, I had no idea. But it was a great way to be like, okay, I actually don't know. I must have had some reason for this. Now let me like think about it next time I do it again and roll into it. And I think there's a way to help people who are performing at the edge of their ability, which is really what we're talking about. Help them become more conscious of the choices they're making, just like you in the water and waking up early. Become more conscious of the choices they're making, but also of the systems that are supporting those choices in a way that is respectful and elevating and helps them figure out, okay, here's a point of leverage I hadn't thought of before. I'm going to go after this,
Yeah.
and that's going to help me be better.
I love that. Because, okay, so for you, what you said your head was down somewhere, you were in some compromising
My
position.
hand, yeah, my
Oh,
hand.
your
I
hand,
don't know
okay.
how I did this. Yeah,
But even if when you say, I don't know, or I have no idea, even if then and that makes you think about how you got into that position, there's something to learn from that. And then on the flip side, it also gives you the option or the possibility to think through, okay, what would I have done different? What would I
sure.
have done to prevent myself to be in that position? One of my favorite topics, things to dig into with Green Berets, with Major League Baseball players, with elite performers is them recognizing the great things that they're doing that
Mm,
they might not give enough credit to.
mm,
Because when you talk about creating systems, creating a process, these guys and girls are where they are for a reason. They're doing things really well. But because of the high standards that they have, because they're constantly pushing that edge, that limit, oftentimes they don't give enough credit to the great things that they're doing. And sometimes they don't even see it. That's just expectation. And for me, it's never about handing out gold stars. It's never about handing out trophies, but it's about creating these foundations of things that you're doing well so that you can lean back on them, that you can leverage them, that you can use them to continue pushing yourself out onto the edge and the limit. And so one of my favorite things is when I'm having a conversation with a performer that I'm like, they're incredible, but they have that moment. They're like, oh, yeah, I do that. I am pretty good at that. And recognizing that so that now it's a more specific tool. Now it's an advantage that they can intentionally deploy as opposed to just something that happens, as opposed to something that they almost luck into. So now they can be more consistent with it. They can be more intentional with it. And I always find that I find that so fascinating.
So we're still on curiosity, and now we're moving from like what are the choices you're making to what are the choices you want to be making? Can you amplify the ones that you love? Can you find these points of leverage and can you redesign in subtle ways your responses to stuff to take advantage of those moments of leverage? That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. And I often use the word foundation
Mm,
because I want these high performers to continuously be investing in a solid footing. And I think that it's a very apt metaphor because the best of the best are constantly pushing their limits. They're going into deep water and by having a solid foundation, having a solid footing, building a good base for themselves, that's what allows them to go into that uncharted territory and know that, hey, I have these systems in place, I have the tools in place that allow me to go into uncertain situations, uncharted territory, all this stuff. And I know I'm going to be good. I know I'm going to be okay. And and then okay can be it's very relative, right? It looks very different in different domains, but just that concept of having a firm foundation that you are well aware of, that you're well familiar with, what gives you that solid base allows you to continue pushing those limits in brilliant ways.
I want to share another question from a prior guest. This is from Diane Chadwick Jones, who works in the oil and gas industry at a very high level. And she described the experience of going to oil rigs and working with these really big, rough guys. And she'd ask them, "What are you struggling with?" And they'd say, "Nothing." She'd be like, "Okay, what did you used to struggle with?" "Nothing." And then finally she'd ask them, "Somebody that's like you, but weaker and smaller, what do you think they would struggle with?" They'd be like, "Oh, that valve is really hard to turn over there." And all of a sudden, it just like completely circumvents and does some judo on their sort of sense of ego and everything. And when you're describing this, like, what are you doing? The sister question of that, in some sense, is if you weren't as good at your job, what do you think you'd find challenging? What are the hidden areas that you're overcoming that you don't realize that every day you walk in and you've got 30 pounds of lead on your bag for reasons that nobody knows about? Or there's this thing that's really hard that doesn't need to be hard, or there's some way that there's like the positive spin of like, what are you already doing right that maybe you're not focused on? And then there's the other spin, which is how is our system failing you that we're not aware of because you're just so good that you're compensating for it? And we get curious on both of those vectors. We end together at this arc we were talking about at the beginning, which is like performance comes from the human becoming curious and better, and the system doing a better job supporting them at the same time. And when you run both of those things together, then you get this absolutely potential for true elite performance.
Yeah. I think how powerful the questions can be, right? And just by framing the questions in a different way, we can attack some of those things. That's a brilliant job by that guest of breaking it down of, okay, you might not be struggling, but where would someone else struggle? And that also makes me think of when I talk to people that are trying to get into the field, I think of those, I wouldn't even call them hidden costs, but just the hidden stuff that we don't see.
Mm.
And it makes me think of how oftentimes we fall into the trap of thinking, I don't want to struggle. I shouldn't be struggling. I need to avoid this struggle or whatever it is. But then when you get into some of these conversations of strengths, of solid foundation, you naturally get a conversation about overcoming obstacles, overcoming challenges. They didn't get there because of natural talent or just natural skill. It's because they had to overcome something. They had to attack something. They had to work really hard at something. And then all of a sudden, they're a Green Beret. All of a sudden, they're a Major League Baseball player. But it's because of these hidden struggles, these hidden challenges that they overcame that got them to that point. But it's still a trap that we all deal with where it's, oh no, I'm struggling in this moment. This isn't good. I need to get out
Mhm.
of this. It's a moment, just this helped you get to this point. Right. And so it can help strip away some of those expectations or those connotations that come with that struggle and allow you to just be present of, okay, what's at my disposal? How do I want to attack this? How can I be present with this? Because two steps down the road, it's going to be something that you're thankful for. Or it's going to be something that you now utilize to leverage yourself into even a stronger position.
Man, that's so good. A moment just this helped you get to this point. That is so good. I hate to do this, but we have to wrap this up. This has been so fun and so interesting. I want to give you a chance on the way out to issue a challenge to everybody listening to this, something you want them to do differently on their next day, their next shift, anything like that. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to stall for you slightly by doing our normal disclaimer, which is that our job here on the Emergency Mind podcast is to take the best of what other people and teams have figured out about performance under pressure. We don't do anything that's medical advice, and myself and my guests are only talking for ourselves, not for anybody that we work with or for. All right, so hopefully that's enough time for you to come up with something brilliant to say at the end here. But what do you want folks to do differently after listening to this episode?
It makes me think of us talking about strengths. And so generally, I want people to pay attention to their strengths and to utilize them. But more specifically, I would be very curious. if your listeners, while paying attention to their strengths and their competitive advantages and saying, hey, this is something that I'm pretty good at this, pick one action that you could do today or in the next couple of days to specifically leverage that strength. So if it's your ability to connect with people, then maybe it's shooting off a text, shooting off a call, and reaching out to someone that you haven't talked to in a while and recognizing them for their strengths or something that you're seeing them do well or something like that. I can't tell you what that is, but it's the idea of paying attention to the strengths, pay attention to the things that you do well, and create an intentional, purposeful plan to leverage that in some specific way.
I love it. Marius, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for sharing all the wisdom.
I appreciate you, Dan. This was a lot of fun. I feel like I learned more than anything else. This is perfect for me.
That's awesome.